Military Broadcast Radio, the station that's giving veterans a voice.
Find us on the web at mbradio.us.
This entire military is one cohesive, dedicated force. And the threats to our nations, they don't sleep. They're watching our every move. Iran, Russia, China, North Korea, ISIS, Al-Qaeda. They may be watching this right now. Our military should not be mistaken for a cable news gabfest show. We don't care what you look like. We don't care who you voted for, who you worship, what you worship, who you love. It doesn't matter if your dad left you millions when he died or if you knew who your father was. We have been honed into a machine of lethal moving parts that you would be wise to avoid if you know what's good for you. We will not be intimidated. We will not back down. We've seen war. We don't want war. But if you want war with the United States of America, there's one thing I can promise you, so help me God. Someone else will raise your sons and daughters.
Military Broadcast Radio, the station that's giving veterans a voice.
Find us on the web at mbradio.us.
Opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent.
Find us on the web at mbradio.us.
Join Terry with Tracer Rounds every Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern to hear interviews with veteran artists, veteran business owners, and businesses that support veterans. Catch us on Roku, Amazon Fire TV, and MB Radio. If you miss a show, you can listen again on Reefs Across America Radio every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern. Tune in to see if you are on target. MBR, giving veterans a voice.
And welcome back to the Trace Around Show. And I'm Terry, your host, and you're on Military Broadcast Radio, where we're giving veterans a voice. And tonight's voice is to Michael Sugrue. And he is an Air Force veteran, and he is a retired police officer, and he is an author. Welcome, Michael.
Thanks for having me.
So excited to talk to you. I found you on Instagram, and I found your book, and I ordered it, and I started reading it. And I'm telling you, I would be traumatized by my first couple weeks on the police force as well. There's a lot you see and do that people just would not think of and would not know of, and probably shouldn't know of, I guess, is probably how that should go. So you were in the Air Force. You were active Air Force, right?
Correct. I served 6.5 years in the United States Air Force. I was a security forces. I went in as a second lieutenant right out of college, eventually promoted to captain. I was stationed all over the world, South America, Europe, Middle East. I focused on anti-terrorism, force protection, air-based ground defense, foreign airfield assessments. And I was also a Phoenix Raven, which is a very specialized subset of security forces members. I go into more detail about that in the book. But since the inception of the Phoenix Raven program, there's less than 3,500 Air Force people that have ever served in that capacity. So I got out in 2004, out at Travis Air Force Base, where I still live in Northern California. And I immediately transitioned into civilian law enforcement at that time.
How did you become a Phoenix Raven, and how did you hear about it? I know you have to be assigned to an Air Mobility Command, but how did you know about the Ravens? I'd never heard about it until I read your bio.
I heard about it the first couple years into my serving in the Air Force. Again, at first I was not assigned to an Air Mobility Command base, but my last duty assignment at Travis, which is an AMC base, I was selected to be the chief of security forces for the Air Mobility Operations Group. And so I knew at that time, going in to lead this unit, that I wanted to lead by example. And that's kind of how I've always lived. That's how I've always tried to lead other people, to say, look, you know what, I'm willing to do exactly what I'm expecting you to do. And so I thought, what better than to go through this program? It's very grueling physically, it's very demanding. There's an extremely high washout rate. And for me, I was actually the ranking student in the course. So as you can imagine, all the instructors are actually usually enlisted, senior enlisted guys and gals. And so they really gave it to me during that course, and I earned it. It was not easy.
Yeah.
And looking back now, I would say it's probably one of my proudest achievements throughout my entire military career. And I definitely look back fondly on that.
So to be a Raven, you have to score 90% on the PT test. Is that right?
Well, no, it's much more than that. You
Yeah.
have to be selected by your commander.
Okay.
You have to go through several Army physical fitness tests, and you have to score at the very top.
Yeah.
That's the minimum qualification, but the fact is that there's a lot of people that want to go through the program, so it's extremely competitive.
Mhm.
And once you get there, it's just nonstop PT, and they really work you. It's not a extremely long program, but it's very intense, very grueling, and very long days. And I've always prided myself in being physically fit. Even today, being retired from law enforcement and being a disabled veteran, I go to the gym 2 hours a day. It's absolutely critical for not just physical health, but mental health. And it's one of the things that I really advocate for anyone serving in the military or any first responders out there. As far as maintaining your overall wellness and resiliency, it's extremely important to be physically fit.
I don't disagree with that. We had an artist that had been on the show earlier, and he also was police. He came out of the Army and then went to the police force, and then, with combat and everything else, he had some issues with PTSD. And his go-to is music and then running. And he's like, I think he said he's 50 something right now, and he still runs like he was back in basic training. Like he still does 3 and 5 and 10-mile runs. I mean, like whatever he feels for the day. So I completely understand that really fitness is a way to cope and to keep yourself healthy and to keep yourself well. I don't disagree with that at all.
Absolutely.
So what was your degree in? Was it in political science, or how did you decide that policing was your avenue or your career field you wanted to go into?
So my interest in both the military and law enforcement actually started in childhood. My grandfather served in the Army Air Corps at the time before the Air Force. And my stepfather, who primarily raised me with my mother, he came into my life when I was very young. He was already in law enforcement. And that's really where I saw that the family unit, the camaraderie, the excitement. And at 8 years old, I was actually a police volunteer, if you can believe that.
Oh, wow.
And in high school, I became a police explorer for his police department. And I ended up getting a full scholarship through the Air Force ROTC program to California State University, Sacramento. And I majored in criminal justice with a minor in psychology. And my whole plan at that time was I wanted to go into federal law enforcement. But I knew to do that, you had to have a 4 year degree, but I also knew that you had to have other experience and things that made you competitive. And so my plan was to go straight into the Air Force. I got security forces, which was my very first choice. So I was very excited about that. I owed 4 years. That was the commitment for getting the scholarship.
Mm.
I was going to get out then and go straight into like the DEA or the US Marshals or the FBI. And a lot of things changed and happened when I was in the military. First and foremost, when I was stationed at FE Warren Air Force Base and I dealt with nuclear security out in the remote missile fields and also the weapons storage area on base, we had a lot of workings with federal agencies. And I learned quickly that that necessarily wasn't for me. I actually wanted to be more boots on the ground, driving a black and white patrol car, responding to calls, interacting with people constantly, just doing different things every single day. And so I was actually stationed in Germany in the middle of those 4 years, and 9/11 happened. And a short time after that, I found myself in the Middle East, and I ended up staying in 6.5 years instead of those 4 years. And that's where I decided to go into the civilian law enforcement back here in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Wow, you've had like a whole upbringing in the policing and with both military and then now on your retired policing side. So you grew up with those experiences, and so you just didn't. You knew that was your lane. And so once you got out of the military and you joined the police force, how did you find that? I mean, what was when you were actually on the job, how did you deal with some of the things you saw? Because did you expect to see some of the things that you saw as a policeman?
Of course, with my background and my upbringing, I had a lot of exposure to the civilian law enforcement. I did tons of ride-alongs when I was actually a teenager, and so I saw early on firsthand what law enforcement officers have to deal with, and that drew me to the job. Honestly, I
Okay.
mean, just the danger, the excitement. So I can't say that any of it was unexpected, but what I think people don't realize, and I am both military and retired law enforcement, so I can
Yeah.
speak to this. But I think the general public, when they see combat veterans, and again, only a small percentage of military members are actually even combat veterans, but the ones that are, they usually go to a defined hostile area for a defined period of time. They may do that once in their career. They may do it two, three, four. I mean, if they're special operations, they may do it over 10 times
Right.
in their career, right? So, and after they leave those dangerous areas, they're usually back stateside at their homes and their bases, and they're not exposed to that same threat, that same risk.
Yeah.
Whereas if you look at law enforcement officers, every single day for up to 30 years or more in a career, you are at combat. Every single
It's
call that we go
true.
to, every single vehicle stop, every single contact, pedestrian stop, bicycle stop, all these are unknown people. Some could be wanted, some can be armed and dangerous, they could be high, they could be on drugs. They may want to kill us. And so there's a lot of unknown. And you have to be ready mentally, physically, I mean, 24/7. And if you take that even a step further, and you look at a few years back when the huge anti-law enforcement came to light, that movement,
Yeah.
you have law enforcement officers and their families that are constantly watching their back, going home when they're off duty, when they're out with their loved ones, and there's just that constant threat at all
Yeah.
times. There really is no safe zone or safe area. And ironically enough, I think the general public equates, post-traumatic stress disorder, what I call post-traumatic stress injury. It's kind of expected. It's, people are aware of it, they try to mitigate it. But when they look at our first responders, including firefighters, dispatchers, paramedics, and especially police officers, they don't equate the same. And I
Right.
honestly would argue that the level of exposure to traumatic incidents is much, much higher as a civilian law enforcement officer than most of the time in the military. And again, I'm not comparing here, I'm not saying one's better than the other, but the reason why I'm talking about this is to illustrate that our first responders are literally exposed to hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of traumatic incidents over their entire career.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you. Just hearing you talk and then understanding the state of alertness that you're under all the time, because you, like you said, it's the unknown, and really, and truthfully, when everything was set against police officers, when the media and anybody that could have a voice was having a voice against police and against any kind of law enforcement, so be it federal agents, ICE, or any of that other stuff. They all were kind of feeling the pains of this unrest, and so you were constantly having to be vigilant and watching your back. So I can't imagine living in that state for a long time, because that has to be very mentally draining, and then physically affecting your wellness overall.
It affects everything. And I mean,
Yeah.
even now, I medically retired in 2018 from law enforcement. So we're talking almost 8 years later, and I'm still always on high alert. I'm always scanning. My back is always to the wall. I'm always facing the door. I always know where the exits are. I'm scanning for weapons. Every single person is still a potential threat in my mind. And so
Yeah.
I would say that although things have gotten a little bit better and they've lessened, especially with
Yeah.
my work on recovering from post traumatic stress, I honestly don't think it will ever go away. Just like most our military members, any that have been in combat or been in dangerous, hostile situations, unfortunately, it's going to be part of us that stays with us for the rest of our lives. And it not only impacts us, but it impacts our spouses, our loved
Yeah.
ones, our children, everyone around us. And so, we have to educate them on why it is we do what we do. They may think, like, as a simple example, we could be out to dinner and my fiance is talking to me and she thinks I'm not listening to her because I'm scanning everyone behind her and scanning everyone that's walking by.
Yeah.
And it's something that I really can't control. It just happens organically and it happens naturally now.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a learned muscle or a muscle memory from, just having to constantly be at watch for what's going on. So, during your career, how did you deal with some of these things that you came across? Did you seek help? Was the police department you work for, were they supportive of getting help, or did they look at it negatively? Because the stigma at one time in the military was you didn't ask for help, because if you asked for help, then you were going to be labeled and then maybe put out. So everyone was very afraid to even say, I think I'm struggling with something here, and they were afraid to ask for help. So did your police department be supportive of you, or did you even know you needed it, or did you seek it?
Well, there's a lot to what you just asked, so I'm going to try to go
Sorry.
back a little bit. And I'll go back to my military time. I served active duty from 1998 to 2004,
Mhm.
and I can't think of a single time during that I thought about mental health, that thought about suicide prevention or suicide awareness. Honestly, I was so focused, especially as being the leader of these units, of putting up this perfect facade
Yeah.
of being this warrior, this invincible hero who's always going to run towards danger, never run away from it, and doesn't have feelings, doesn't have emotions, just attaches myself, gets the mission done. And so that started in boot camp. It's then got evolved or increased during security forces training, and then here I am in 2004. I go through a civilian law enforcement academy, and again, the only time I can ever remember hearing about mental health is we had a small block on encountering people in crisis on the street, people who
Mm.
are a danger to themselves or a danger to others, what we call here 5150 for the Welfare Institutions Code, and kind of how to mitigate and deal with them. But we didn't receive any training. We didn't have any senior officers that came in and talked about the realities of the job, the realities of what we're going to see, what we're going to endure, how it's going to affect our mental health, our physical health, how it's going to affect our relationships, our
Mhm.
marriages, our children. And so again, I'm going through my career, and early on, I learned that when we go to these horrible incidents, we use gallows humor. We joke about it. It's not because we think they're funny, but it's a way to kind of deflect and make fun of a situation and not internalize it. And
Right.
so, really, that's what I did for many, many years. I didn't process any of it. I didn't talk about any of it. I didn't deal with any of it. I just kept stuffing it down and stuffing it down, thinking that it would just magically go away and disappear.
Yeah.
And it was 8 years into my civilian career when I was involved in a fatal shooting, a very traumatic incident where a guy with a butcher knife was trying to kill a couple inside a condominium. And then he tried to kill myself and my fellow officers. And what I tell people is that incident, for whatever reason, it took away that feeling of invincibility that I had those 6.5 years in the military, now 8 more years in civilian law enforcement. And it was gone in a millisecond. And at that point, my life kind of started spiraling downward. But I don't think it's because of the shooting. What I think it is, it's the tipping point. My
Yeah.
jar, if you can imagine, is just filling up with these traumatic incidents. I'm not dealing with them. I'm not processing them. And that shooting caused my jar to start to overflow and my life to kind of start to fall apart. And I didn't have any healthy coping mechanisms. My idea of dealing with PTS at that time was just to drink more, isolate, not talk to people, drink myself to sleep. and it didn't work. Eventually, I started having major marital problems. Eventually, then I was getting divorced. I was having health issues. I got sued immediately by the family of the guy that tried to kill me and my officers,
Oh my
endured a
goodness.
4-year federal lawsuit. And during that time, my agency was very progressive. We had peer support. We had a contracted therapist who specialized in first responders. We did training like once a year. But again, I didn't believe in those programs at that time. I thought
Mm.
that if I were to seek out help or talk to anybody, that would be weakness and
Yeah.
that nobody would trust me. Nobody would want to follow me and they would look down upon me as a leader. And so again, I just stuffed it away, stuffed it away. And now 4 years after my shooting, I mean, literally everything is just going downhill. And it got to the point where I did not want to be here anymore. I literally started trying to get myself killed in the line of duty, hoping I got killed by a bad guy. So the opposite of suicide by cop, I was hoping for suicide by a bad guy. And it was the fateful event close to the 4-year anniversary of my shooting. My best friend tried to kill himself when I was on duty.
Oh my
And
goodness.
that was my wake up call.
Yeah.
Thank God he survived. But a month after that is when I finally got the strength and courage to ask for help after those 4 years of just suffering in silence. And initially, my agency was very, very supportive in the beginning.
Yeah.
But when my recovery wasn't quick enough or fast enough for them, that's where they turned their back on me. And that's what I call the administrative betrayal or institutional betrayal. And that really just hit me to the core.
Yeah. Yeah, there's not a timeline for healing. You know, it doesn't matter if someone thinks, oh, that should only take a couple of weeks. You should be fine. Just get a couple of counseling sessions, just, talk it out, should be just fine. But things don't work on that type of timeline. So it's unfortunate that your department decided that you had to be on a timeline in order to be better or to get better, for them to be able to support your, overall mental health and physical health. It's unfortunate that it came to that, but like you said, you're used to just saying it's going to be okay and not dealing with it and just moving on. And at some point, like you said, it just gets to where you can't move on anymore. Everything just starts to unwind and then you've got to figure out how to fix it. So your department wasn't supporting you in fixing it. So what happened next? What did you do in order to get to the place you are now?
Well, unfortunately, I made the decision to medically retire 8 months into my recovery. And
Mm.
they actually, at that point, dropped an internal affairs investigation on me for something that supposedly, allegedly happened years earlier. And so that actually held up my medical retirement for another 8 or 9 months.
Oh,
And,
wow.
during that period, there was just a lot of unknown. And,
Yeah.
but I did have a outstanding support circle as far as a culturally competent therapist and clinician. I had gone through the West Coast post trauma retreat. I had found these first responder support meetings. I was taking medication. I was doing meditation. I was just doing all these things to get better. And
Mm.
so I actually remember when I finally did medically retire in August of 2018, I was still ashamed and embarrassed to tell anybody outside my inner circle of what I had gone through and all the things that I'd experienced and the feelings that I was having because I remember thinking initially when I asked for help that there was something wrong with me that people wouldn't understand and that I was the only one. And I
Yeah.
realized through my recovery that there's countless of my brothers and sisters out there who
Right.
have gone through or are going through the same exact thing. And until you start to get that help and until you start to meet other people in the same situations and see how they've come through it and see how they've come, recovered,
Yeah.
that's what truly gives you hope. And so I remember it was about a year after I medically retired. Ironically enough, this podcast host, and I'd never been on a podcast, I'd never publicly shared my story. He kept harassing me in a good way, to the point where I couldn't say no anymore. I tried for months,
Yeah.
he kind of backed me into a corner. And it was that interview that changed everything for me, because once that interview got aired, I mean, I remember I got messages from all over the world from people that watched it or listened to it, and they started sharing their stories with me and telling me how my story was also their story.
Yeah.
And it literally just set me on this path, what I now call my calling. This is my purpose. This is why, other than my daughter, the reason I get up every single day is because I want to give back and show people the light. I want to show them the hope, and I want to show people that no matter how dark it is, because trust me, I was there. I was to the point where I didn't want to be here anymore. But
Yeah.
now I'm living a better life than I ever have, than I ever imagined. And it wasn't easy. It
Yeah.
took time. It took patience. There was good days, there was bad days, there was setbacks. There's still a lot of things that I have to do now to maintain my wellness, to maintain my physical health and my mental health. And so, again, I don't want people to be under the illusion that I'm saying this is easy,
Yeah.
especially the longer that you wait to get help. Know that it's probably going to take longer to get better, but it is possible. And I'm living proof of that.
That's awesome. I mean, you went from dealing with all these things to finally focusing on getting well and getting healed, and now you're sharing your story, which is helping others, and you are giving back because you do speaking engagements too, and you
Yeah, I
work
speak.
for a foundation as well.
Well, so I speak all over the world. I'm actually speaking in Italy next month, but I will tell
Wow.
you that I only speak about 4 to 5 times a year maximum, because the old me was so career focused and focused on my job and promotions and special assignments, where now I'm focused on living life. I'm focused on my family. I'm focused on my daughter. And so I really limit my speaking, because it does take so much out of me. Like, literally, when I speak, I rip open my heart and soul for the world to see and to hear,
Yeah.
knowing that it's going to help them. And I'm also a peer volunteer for the West Coast Post Trauma Retreat, which I went through as a client back in May of 2017. That program absolutely changed my life. And I'm also an ambassador for Save a Warrior, SAW, which is also for military members and first responders. And that program focuses on childhood trauma, something that I didn't think I needed to address. But in reality, it was that last piece, that last thing that I needed to address. And so now, having gone through that program, again, that program changed my life. I'm now an ambassador for them. And I will tell you that both of those programs are absolutely life changing. And if anyone wants to know more about them, you can simply just Google either program, Save a Warrior or the West Coast Post Trauma Retreat.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing those resources because I'm sure there is somebody that will take advantage and be helped by it. So thank you for sharing that. So how did you decide you wanted to be an author, or why, or how did that come about?
It's actually a great story. So it's something, again, I never planned on. I truly believe, just like that first podcast interview, everything happens for a reason. If we go back in time, right before COVID happened, my co-author, her name is Dr. Shauna Springer, or Doc Springer. She's a Harvard graduate. She's a licensed clinical psychologist. She had worked for the Department of Veterans Affairs for many years and worked with hundreds and hundreds of combat veterans. And now she works for a Stella, which is a company based out of Chicago that does a stellate ganglion block, which is a physical treatment for the physical symptoms of PTS. I didn't know her, but she reached out to me on LinkedIn and sent me a message and just said, "Hey, I see that you're out there, you're doing things in the realm of mental health and suicide prevention. I've listened to some of your interviews, and I would love to just set up a phone call to see, if we can help each other out, or we can work together." And so I'm like, "Yeah, no problem. Let's do it." And so she calls me up, and I tell her my story that's in the book, Relentless Courage, Winning the Battle Against Frontline Trauma. And
Got mine
she told
too.
me, she told me about what she's doing. And after I told her my story, she actually asked me point blank, she said, "Have you ever thought about writing a book?" And I kind of laughed because I said, well, I've been asked this a few times before. I said, but a couple things. First of all, people don't know, but in civilian law enforcement, like 90% of our job is just writing for hours and hours and hours. I mean, every contact, every ticket, every criminal case is just nonstop writing. And I am
Right.
so burnt out from writing. And the other thing is that with post traumatic stress, um, unfortunately, I don't have that same focus that I used to have. I don't have
Mm.
that same drive that I used to have in certain areas. And so we kind of left the conversation at that. A week later, she hits me back up and she said, look, Michael, I can't stop thinking about your story. And she said, look, I've heard countless stories, but your story is very unique and your story is going to save countless lives. And
Yeah.
it turned out that she had already written, I think, 3 books. She wrote 2 books by herself and she collaborated with another veteran on a third book. And she was already a best-selling author. And she said, look, I want to work with you and I want to do this project together. And this is only our second phone call. Like, we had not even met in person. And I agreed without even meeting her in person. I said, you know what? Let's do it, because I knew in my heart it was right. And then COVID happened. And so we had to work on this project virtually for almost a full year until we actually met in person.
Wow.
And this book is, it's groundbreaking. I don't know of any other book like it in the world. And I'll tell you why, because it has a very unique format. And it's, every chapter has 2 distinct parts. The first part is my story told in my voice, all the way back to childhood until present day. In the second half of every chapter, Doc Springer comes in. She breaks everything down, very easy to understand terms. She explains, what I'm going through, why I'm going through it, the impacts of it on me, on my family members, on my coworkers. And together we show a pathway to healing.
Yeah.
We truly show what's possible between a veteran, a first responder, and a culturally competent clinician, somebody who truly understands us, someone who truly gets us. And so this book came out in April 2022, and it's been a bestseller for over 40 weeks. #1 in Canada, the US. I think as of today, there's already 921 written reviews,
Wow.
and they are just, I mean, heartfelt, multi-paragraph reviews on how this book is saving relationships, it's saving careers, but most importantly, it's saving lives. And a year after the actual hard copy came out, the Kindle, the paperback, the
Mhm.
hardcover, we went into a professional music studio where a lot of famous musical artists have recorded, and we did an audible version in our own voices.
Oh,
And
wow.
I mean, I relived every single incident in the studio. So when you hear it, it's not like any other audible. It's like literally like watching a movie. I mean, the hairs on the back of your neck are going to stand up. It's going to give you goosebumps. In certain parts, it's going to make your stomach turn. I mean, it's just riveting. And we did that because we realized, like myself, I can't read books anymore. I mean, I know that sounds funny because we did a book, but I need to do audibles. And so there's such a huge portion of veterans, people with TBI, traumatic brain injury, post traumatic stress, first responders that don't have the time or the ability or focus to sit down and read a book. And so now you can listen to it in the car, you can listen to it at the gym, in the shower when you're getting ready. You can listen to it at any time. And so it's a game changer. It's literally, like I said, saving lives all over the world.
Yeah, I think you're right about lack of focus for some that have had traumatic brain injuries or PTSD or things like that, or somebody that just really is busy and they want to read but they just can't schedule it in. So audiobooks is definitely a way to go to hear those stories without having to sit down and direct focus on reading the material. So I love that you did that, and that really is I I just got chills just hearing you say you're gonna live the moment with me because you're hearing me from the perspective of with which I saw it. So, I mean, just hearing it like that, I can't imagine. I've been reading the book. I haven't gotten all the way through it yet, but just reading some of the chapters, I'm like, "Oh my goodness, like that that it is what you've seen and what you've done is impactful to a person, both mentally and physically. And then, you working through those things with the doc and talking about them and putting them in there. And I do love that you put the chapters on top of one another, basically. So you tell your story, and then she tells, okay, this is what's really going on, and this is how we're understanding the scenario. So I love that it's put that way, because like you said, it's chunks, it's bite size, where you can just break it down, issue by issue or situation by situation, to really focus on what you need to do to resolve that in your mind, or just to be okay. I don't know if you ever are okay with it, but knowing that you've dealt with that it is what it is at this point, and now we need to move forward, and we need to focus on getting well and getting healthy. So that really is a good way to do it, I think. And I was really wanting to present it to where I work, because I have a civilian job as well, and I deal with police and fire, and so I really wanted to send it to the chiefs and have them really look through the book and really see how it could impact their department and help some of their police officers and firefighters too.
Absolutely. And, historically, you have to either choose between like a true life, riveting story, or like a clinical textbook on psychology.
Yeah.
And, the thing is, and I will warn people that when you read or listen to this book, you will be triggered. This book will have an effect on you. It will have a physical effect. It's going to have an emotional effect. Again, your story may not be my story, but it's going to be similar, and that the reactions, the feelings are going to be the same. And so the key here is that, yeah, you're going to be triggered, but right after that, in comes Doc Springer, and she's going to bring you back in. She's going to bring you back into focus, and she's going to validate why you're feeling the way that you're feeling. And you're going to realize that it's not just you. You're going to realize that nothing is wrong with you. This is actually all normal, given all the abnormal things that you've had to see and deal with. And
Yeah.
then, like I said, you're going to see that pathway to healing. And that's why it makes it so important. It makes it life-saving.
Yeah, I agree. You can't sugarcoat reality. I mean, sometimes you'd like to, but you can't if you're going to learn from it and heal from it. It has to be the way things were. It has to be told in the context with which it was seen or heard or done, so that you can really then move on and move past, if it's an opportunity to do so. I mean, sometimes you're always going to see or hear or remember things. I was reading in the book where you said a certain smell will bring all those visual images back up and cause, another round of, oh my goodness, now I'm remembering this, or I'm seeing this. Maybe not with the same, I don't know if I would call it, not lack of emotion, but you kind of remove yourself from it, where you're not having to like totally be in that moment, in that moment of stress or maybe panic at the point that that you were dealing with it, but you're seeing it kind of as somebody watching what's going on versus being the person in that scenario, I think. Would you say that's the way it is, or do you put yourself right back in that situation?
Well, I think the key, and I learned this in my recovery, is knowing when you're getting triggered. There's a lot of power in that, but it's not just knowing when you're getting triggered, but how to mitigate and lessen the effects of those triggers.
Yeah.
And so I do think that some things will always affect us. It's just the way it is. I don't think certain things are ever going to go away. I think they might be less impactful as time goes on. But I think the big part of that is managing and dealing with those triggers.
Yeah.
Again, knowing how to, whether it's breathing, whether it's physically removing yourself from the situation, meditation, playing a certain song. I mean, there's different things that work for different people. And again, it depends where you're at and who's around. But knowing those different scenarios, like, hey, if I'm out in public at a restaurant, or I'm in line somewhere and I get triggered, knowing ahead what you're going to do to handle that trigger is very important. And that's a
Yeah.
key part of recovery from post-traumatic stress injury.
So what would you say to somebody else that's been a police officer and never really dealt with, or maybe just a first responder or a military member that's not dealt with something they had to do when they were in the uniform and they were overseas in combat, or maybe they weren't even in combat. Maybe they were a military policeman or something on a post or a base, and they had to deal with something very um, uh, traumatic. I guess I'll just put it like that, traumatic. What would you say to them? You know, because there isn't any shame in asking for help and seeking understanding of what went on and how to move past it. But what's your advice, even if if you don't have a supportive leadership team in whatever department or branch of military you're in? What's your suggestion?
Well, first, I would address the dark reality of our jobs and the effect on us. It is a undisputed fact that as a military service member, a military veteran, a first responder, again, whether you're a police officer, a firefighter, dispatcher, paramedic, we are much more likely to die by our own hands than the hands of another. And I'm going to say that one more time. We are much more likely to die by our own hands than the hands of another.
Wow.
And although we have not talked about this directly, suicide is the number one killer over deaths in combat and line of duty deaths. Undisputed fact. You're much more likely to kill yourself. Okay. So that's the first thing that people need to realize. And the other thing with suicide is, and this is part of what kind of pulled me out of the darkness, is when I learned that a parent that kills themselves, their child is much more likely to kill themselves after that.
Oh my
Again,
goodness.
undisputed fact. So think about that. If you're out there suffering and you're feeling hopeless and you're in the depths of darkness, if you take your life, your loved ones, your children, they are much more likely to kill themselves. I mean, that alone, if that doesn't wake you up and get your attention, I'm not sure what will.
Right.
But what I will tell you is that there is endless resources out there, things I didn't know about it. We have an entire resource section in the back of our book with confidential, private, many free resources run by nonprofits and volunteers, text lines, hotlines, people you could call right now 24/7 and not have to share any of your personal information on where you work, what's your last name, and you can get help. You can get resources. You can start that journey. I get the reality of there is still a huge fear of repercussion of things affecting your job, especially those first responders out there, thinking that you may lose your job, you may lose special assignments, your ability to promote. Those are all valid and real fears. And depending on where you are or who you work for, it's very legitimate that that might actually happen. But what I'm telling you is there's a lot of things you can do outside of the chain of command, outside of your direct supervisor, if you don't trust them, to find help and to find those resources. And if you need help finding those, you can contact me on my social media. I'm on every single platform you can imagine. You just type in Sergeant Michael Sugrue. I check my messages daily and I'll give you the resources. I'll point you in the right direction. But it's important to know that you can't do this by yourself.
Yeah.
I thought I could for so long, and that almost cost my life. And thank God it didn't, because I know sitting here today, had I not made that phone call, I would not be here right now. I have absolutely no doubt I would not be here right now. And where would my daughter be? Where would my loved ones be?
Yeah. I hadn't heard that statistic, and that's really scary. But it is good to know that, that if you're thinking about that, think of your family, think of the loved ones that are left behind and what's going to happen to them and what's their projected path if you do that. So definitely think about it, get help, call. I love that you really bring it home for first responders and military. Like, it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to need help, because sometimes you just do. All of us need help and need someone to talk to. It's not, and maybe it's not even like help, but it is like a coach. When you are joining the military, your drill sergeant is your coach. He tells you how to train, when to train, tells you what to eat, when to get up. And this wellness coach is pretty much the same. This is how you deal with it. This is the exercises you go through. These are the things that are going to help you be successful. So it's really just another coach. There is a physical coach, and then maybe there's a mental coach too, that really will bring all this home. So it's not like you need help per se, but you need coaching. You need resolution on what's going on in your mind's eye, and in your past experiences to resolve. So, I don't want people to think that, like you said, that you're weak or something because you need some support. We all need it in some form or fashion. I mean, that's just reality. We can't live this life alone, and we shouldn't. We should have a support network, and we should have either a peer-to-peer network, or we should have a circle of friends, or, just somebody that's there that we can reach out to.
And I'll tell you, I've done a lot of things in the military. I've done a lot of things in civilian law enforcement. I've been in a lot of dangerous, just horrible situations.
Yeah.
I've come close to losing my life on more than one occasion. But I can tell you that looking back, the bravest and most courageous thing I've ever done in my life was asking for help. It wasn't that fatal shooting where we saved that couple from the guy that was trying to kill them with that huge knife. It was
Yeah.
nothing when I was deployed to South America or the Middle East. It was literally me pulling out my cell phone and having the strength and courage to make that call that I didn't want to make. And that single action, again, today, as I sit here, is the most courageous and bravest thing I've ever done in my entire life.
That says a lot. It really does. Thank you for sharing that. So, what's next for you?
I don't know. I would say that like my ultimate dream or my ultimate goal is for our book to be turned into a major Hollywood movie.
Oh, wow.
That would be the ultimate goal, to see this get much more exposure so that even more lives can be impacted and saved. As far as my personal journey, again, I'm focused on living life.
Yeah.
Life is short, as we all know, and I feel like I truly got a second chance at life. So you're gonna find me most days at a concert, at a Kings basketball game, a Sharks hockey game, or a A's or Giants baseball game. Going to my daughter's functions, traveling. That's what I'm doing like 90% of the time, and the 10% of the time, I'm gonna continue doing podcast interviews. I'm going to continue speaking all over the world, hopefully adding more countries. Like I said, I'm going to Italy in a couple weeks, and I'm extremely excited about that.
Yeah.
I've been in a couple documentary films, and there's another one that I'm in talks with now for potentially another documentary film. So we'll see what happens with that. But again, I want people to know that there really isn't anything special or unique about me. Everyone watching this or listening to this, you have your own story. And sharing your story is not only going to heal you, but it's going to heal others. And I highly encourage people out there, once you have had the ability to start working on yourself, start doing the work to recover from post-traumatic stress injury, think about sharing that story with those around you, because you may just save another life.
True. That's very true. Do you talk to police departments at all, or cities? Do you go around to cities and kind of share your story if someone invites you to do that? Do you go back to those departments, or when you said you're going over to Europe and places like that, Italy, and so is that a law enforcement speaking engagement, or is that some other type of speaking engagement?
So one in Italy is actually active duty Air Force security
Okay.
forces, hundreds of them that are stationed at Aviano Air Base in Italy. But the thing is, I work on a first come, first served basis. So I speak at law enforcement agencies, I've spoken at fire departments. I've spoken at firefighter conferences, first responder conferences, law enforcement conferences, chiefs associations, FBI, National Academy graduates, dispatcher functions, nonprofits. So I really will speak wherever there's a need. My message applies to all those audiences. And, as of now, I've spoken all over, not every single state, but I think I've spoken in over 20 different states in the United States. So there's several more I'd actually like to add to that. So again, if anybody's watching or listening to this, I have 2 more openings for 2026, and then I'm already going to be booking for 2027. But again, it's first come, first serve, and I do a max of 4 to 5 a year, and that is it. I do not do any more.
I love that you know your limit and you set
Yes.
to your limit, and you plan everything around that limit, and you take care of you. And that's what's most important, you and your family. I mean, having that mental break from some of this, because like you said, I can't imagine having to retell your story, and then you're remembering and reliving and doing all those things all over again, and it's another form of trauma. And so I appreciate you sharing your story tonight, and I hope we didn't really set you kind of in a bad place with
No.
dealing with some of this trauma that you've experienced in the past. But I really do appreciate you sharing where you've been and how far you've come, and then what you're doing now, because what you're doing now is definitely making a difference in the right communities that need it. Some, like you said, forget how what a day in the life of a police officer really looks like, or the day in the life of a first responder firefighter, because they see things too that you can't unsee. And just, like police officers, you can't unsee some of those things. You see them and they're forever burned in your mind's eye, and you're having to deal with those sometimes. And, you're always, like you said, you're always dealing with these things, and you're trying to figure out how to resolve them in your mind without letting it overcome you or overwhelm you. So I love that you got connected with the right people to make a difference for yourself, and then in turn you can make a difference for others, and you're definitely doing that.
Thank you.
I really do appreciate you sharing your story. So we've got probably about 3 or 4 minutes left. Is there anything else you'd like to put out about your book, or about what you're doing, or just in general about military service or police service?
I do want anybody that reads this book, I want you to personally reach out to me. I want to hear from you. I want to hear what your thoughts were. Again, send me a message on any social media platform: Facebook, Instagram, X, Parlor, Truth. I mean, TikTok, like every single one of them, I'm on there. So again, I want to hear your thoughts. I want to hear how this book has impacted you, it's impacted your family, because that's what keeps me going.
Yeah.
That's what gives me the strength and the energy to keep sharing my message, to keep talking about this. And the last thing, like you said, I want to remind people that if you are struggling, I promise you, I assure you that you are not alone.
Right.
There is nothing wrong with you. The feelings that you're having are actually normal. Again, abnormal reaction to the horrible things you've had to see and deal with. It's not going to be easy, but I promise you it's going to be worth it. So
Yeah.
please just ask for that help.
That's a good call to action on the part of someone that's struggling, and knows that they need to reach out to somebody. So the first step would be, what would you say, in reaching out? Would it be dealing with EAP if there's one on their job? Would it be the VA if they're a veteran and they have those benefits? Where would you say the first call goes to?
I'd say, first of all, read or listen to Relentless Courage, because that's going to
Yes.
validate all the things that you're feeling and going through. And in the back of that book, again, there's a bunch of confidential text lines and hotlines that are staffed by first responder volunteers or first responder clinicians. And so I would start there. You know what? Because going through EAP or going through those official channels, that's a big step. And I'm not saying don't do it, because if you get to that point where you feel comfortable enough, please do it.
Yeah.
Absolutely do it. But I also want you to know what your options are. I want you to know what all the resources are that are available. I know a lot of first responders who are on the job and they have taken, 4 days, 5 days of vacation, and they've gone to some of these retreats that are absolutely free, where they go away for a week, Save a Warrior, West Coast Post-Trauma Retreat. There is a charge for that, but the Mighty Oaks Foundation, that's a free one. I mean, there's literally probably over 100 different retreats that you could go to, and you could literally just take a few days off work, do it on your own time, and start this process. See, because sometimes that might be enough. There might be connections made there with therapists, with other peers that can start you on this journey of recovery. And if that's not enough, then yeah, please go through your official channels, go through EAP. But I will tell you, don't go to some random marriage family therapist who does not specialize with military members or first responders, because it makes a critical difference. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard from people that they went through EAP, they got some random therapist who had no knowledge or no workings with first responders or military veterans. It ended up causing more harm than good. And they went into one session, walked out vowing to never go again.
Yeah.
And so don't do that. Give this a chance. It takes time. And just like with anything else, you have to have a rapport with your therapist or your clinician. And you're not going to have one with everybody. It's just, we're human. It's human nature. We don't always mesh. And so if you meet one, no harm, no foul, but you don't feel the connection, you don't feel the vibe, that's okay. Move on, find another one. Yeah. And find one that, like I said, that you feel comfortable with, that you trust with your life, that you can tell anything and everything to, and know that you're not going to be looked down upon. You're not going to be judged.
That's very good advice. It's very good advice, because you really do have to find someone that understands the job. With one of the places I work, we have for our police and fire, we have a peer-to-peer network, not just our EAP. This is a separate benefit just for police and fire, dealing with a peer that's been on the job, understands what you're going through, what you've seen, what you've done. So that way you're talking to someone that has a frame of reference, that you're coming from. So that's very good advice, and I highly recommend that as well. So I want to thank you for your time tonight, Michael. I am enjoying reading the book. I say enjoying, but I'm enjoying understanding more and reading how you get through some of that trauma or some of those things. And so, from a point of enjoyment, I'm enjoying understanding more about the inner workings and how you cope and how you deal with these things. So that is very encouraging to me to see that and hear that. So please buy the book. And thank you, Michael, for what you are doing for the veteran and the first responder communities. And I wish you all the success in your speaking engagements and in the book and in getting film made, because I think it would be a great box office hit to really put this in perspective in front of an audience that needs to understand what it means to be a first responder.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. This is Tracer Round signing off.
Life is like a duck. Tough times don't last, but tough people do. Here at Military Broadcast Radio, we're teaming up with our friends at Die Tired, the veteran-friendly music band spreading strength, resilience, and mental health awareness, one shirt at a time.
And check this out. Their brand new shirts feature broadcast beaker right on the breast pocket. A reminder that you can weather the storm and you're never alone.
Shirts are only $25 and proceeds support giving veterans a voice. MBR's mission to teach veterans how to podcast and videocast. Because when our vets are talking, they're not overthinking. They're not second-guessing. Together, we stop the 22 stigma. Grab your shirt today at mbradio.us and hit the shop. Or go directly to toramerch.printavo.com/merch/dietiredband. That's toramerch.printavo.com/merch/dietiredband.
Suit up, stand strong.
Remember, we're unduckable together.
You're built tougher than the storm. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to Military Broadcast Radio. As we wrap up today's show, we want to remind you that the podcast of today's episode will be available right after we go off the air. So if you missed any part of the show or want to listen again, be sure to check it out. And remember, we're here to support and honor our veterans. Your stories and experiences matter, and we are committed to giving you a platform to share them. That's right. We're here to give our veterans a voice. So don't forget to catch the podcast and stay connected with us. Giving our veterans a voice.